Welcome to Your Artsy Girl Podcast. I am your host, Christina Carrere. This is a podcast about art, poetry, writing, and anything about creativity. Sit back, relax, and get your dose of brain food to get your creative juices flowing. Welcome to episode 39. Today's featured guest is Nick Flynn. He has worked as a ship's captain, an electrician, and as a caseworker with homeless adults. He is the author of 12 books, including the New York Times best-selling memoir, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. His most recent book is I Will Destroy You, Graywolf 2019, a collection of poems. He has received fellowships from, among other organizations, the Guggenheim Foundation, the Fine Arts Work Center, and the Library of Congress. His work has won 2 PEN Prizes, been a finalist for Francis Prix Femina, and has been translated into 15 languages. Some of the venues his poems, essays, and nonfiction have appeared in include The New Yorker, The Paris Review, and National Public Radio's This American Life. Since 2004, he has spent each spring in residence at the University of Houston, where he is a professor on the creative writing faculty, focused on poetry. Everyone, please welcome my next featured guest, Nick Flynn. Hi, Nick. Welcome to the show.
Hi, Christina.
Gosh, I'm so honored that to have you on Your Artsy Girl podcast. Kind of surreal.
I'm happy to be here.
Well, thank you. So before we talk about your newly released book, I would like to ask you some questions, particularly for my audience who don't really know yet about your work and your life story. Can you tell us where you were born and where you grew up?
So, yeah, I was born in the same place I grew up. I was born in the same town my mother and father were born in, a little town in Massachusetts called Scituate. Okay. It's a little town on the coast. Had about 15,000 people there in the winter. Had about 30,000 in the summer. So because it was on the beach, so there were summer people that would come. So the population would double, but you wouldn't really know the summer people. There'd be strangers to you. So at least to my family. I grew up with a single mother. My brother and I were raised by our single mother. She was very working class. She had to work, she worked 3 jobs often, at leten 2 jobs, but often 3. It was a town, there weren't a lot of single parents in the town when I grew up. I mean, it's more common now, I guess, but for better or worse. But it was unusual. It was also a very Irish Catholic town, and we weren't Catholic, so we were sort of outsiders in many ways.
I've watched the movie you produced entitled Being Flynn, that was released in 2012, starring Robert De Niro and Julianne Moore. It was based on your memoir, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City. Did you write the screenplay and pitched it? What was the logistics? I knew it took years before it was actually made.
The book came out in 2004, and it got optioned right away, by a director who wrote the screenplay, Paul Weitz. But he and I, we worked closely on the screenplay together. He would send me all the drafts of the screenplay. So, and over the years, it took 7 years for it to get greenlit, and he wrote probably 30 drafts of the screenplay.
Oh, wow.
And they were very different from the beginning. At a certain point, it was very different, sort of unrecognizable from the first draft of it, which was really quite beautiful. And then it got sort of more and more watered down and strange, just because people in different studios would give their input, which wasn't always that great. And so it got, in order to get it, you make compromises to get it made. And then by the end of 7 years, it was kind of unrecognizable. And then we were very fortunate to go back to a closer version of the original one. And probably all the drafts and the input actually probably helped it in the end, because it did change things. It sort of, like all revision does. So.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I've read and heard many interviews you've done. However, I haven't stumbled on to one that explained how you got into writing. I'm sure it's been asked and answered, but can you tell us, how did you find poetry and writing?
Well, I was always drawn to it. It's just one of those things, you're exposed to different things in public schools, and reading and writing was just a thing I was drawn to just from the beginning in some way. I can't really say why. There's not really I don't think there's a why to it, why people get drawn to one thing and not another. But I think just being open to it, to what excites you.
Right.
So I was excited by writing. Like even as a kid, I tried it. I tried it when my daughter's 11 now. When I was 11, I was writing, trying to write like what I was reading. And I would do it collaboratively too, which is sort of an interesting take. I would get a friend and I would sort of, I would convince the friend that the best way we could spend our summer was to write a book like Sherlock Holmes.
Really? That's interesting.
Yeah, we wrote like 50 pages. Like when I was,
wow.
Like quite.
Now, is this friend a writer himself now or no?
No.
Okay.
No, I think it was me because then a few years later I was reading more like Kurt Vonnegut and science fiction.
Oh, yeah.
So I got another friend, and he and I spent the summer writing a science fiction book, and so it seemed like it was and he's not a writer now either, so it seemed like it was, I guess it would have been my the impulse is coming from me.
Well, that's truly amazing. I mean, to think about kids, it's very odd to just like say, hey, let's do some writing, that's really cool.
Yeah, I know. It's very strange, but I would imagine it would happen now too with different things. Like, I'm sure there's kids now that are like saying like, "Hey, let's make a movie." Well, now, yeah. I mean, my daughter, she's 16, but she's been like doing she's been doing animation since she was 10, 11. She's been doing that, creating things. A lot of stuff I did was the writing I did that I was really excited about, and the reading I did was outside of school too. So like it felt like it was sort of a little transgressive. Like it wasn't like what I was supposed to be doing. So I'd find books on my own and read things that they weren't assigning me, and and then write things like that. Like we weren't reading Kurt Vonnegut in junior high, but that's
so you went to college after?
Yeah, I eventually went to college. Yeah, I went to college. I took a couple of years off of high school and worked, and I went to UMass Amherst, the state school. Yeah, and I went to study English. I went to study English. It seemed like a real treat because I'd been out working as an electrician, so I knew I could make money already. So I didn't have to worry about. I didn't have to take a job that would, or study things that would get me a job after college. I already had a job. So I was able to study literature and like liberal arts, a basic liberal arts education. So.
And that pretty much opened the world to you as far as in literature and poetry and everything, I'm sure. Yeah,
I'd already been reading as a kid, but that really, I realized how much more there was to read, because as an English major, you go back and read. Early, things you probably never read, early American literature, and then you go back into reading, Chaucer, the Romantics, and Fairy Queen, and things like that. You read these things which you unless you were forced to, you probably wouldn't have gone around to read. But I really loved the Fairy Queen and Beowulf and all those things. I actually thought they were really great. So.
Let's backtrack and just talk about your first publication. How did that come for you? I mean, you've already started publishing in literary magazines, things like that?
No, I didn't really. I mean, I sort of dropped out of my undergrad after about 3.5 years or so. I dropped out, and then it took me another 10 years or something to finish the degree. So, all through my 20s, I was just working.
That sounds like me. It took me a long time.
I was working and trying to write, but I was also, using drugs and drinking. And that was sort of not helping my writing, probably push it for me, because I guess there's some artists and writers that can produce beautiful things when they're using, but I wasn't one of those. So I had to quit doing that stuff. And when I quit, things sort of came together. I mean, not immediately, but at all. But I got more focused. I got into grad school, and then I probably got my first publications right out of grad school, or maybe even before I got into grad school. Right around then, I was writing some poems. I got some 3 poems are taken for Plowshares, which is quite a big literary magazine. Yeah. I think before grad school, maybe. So it seemed kind of easy, and then I didn't get any poems published for another 10 years. It was just sort of happened that it was just sort of this really lucky moment that the poems were taken by Plowshares, and then it took me a long time to sort of get another body of work together that would be published. So it took my first book I worked on for 10 years. It came out 10 years later.
So I know creating art is not an end-all, be-all solution to all our ailments and inner demons, but did you find that poetry and writing was cathartic for you?
Well, I don't think it's a solution to any of our inner demons.
No. But is it cathartic? Like, does it heal you of some sort or anything like that?
Well, I don't. I don't think, from what I know about catharsis, the Greek, Aristotle just said the catharsis was for the audience of the audience achieves catharsis, but he doesn't talk about the maker of the art. I think the maker of the art is actually it's quite a dangerous, risky proposition. That if you're going to it to hoping to heal yourself, I think you might be going down the wrong path.
Yeah,
I think you should probably go to a therapist or a rehab or some other place to get healed, and then when you're in a good position, then you can sort of be strong enough to face those demons, but not expect that the writing itself will be what allows you to face those demons.
Right. What do you think compels then an artist or a writer to kind of open those wounds and share them to the world? What do you think compels them to do that, you think?
Well, it probably becomes, the wound is, if it's not open, I guess it's some kind of a secret, right? It's some kind of a hidden thing. But if there's something hidden inside one that it's just not going to, it's going to manifest in maybe strange and inappropriate ways in your life. If you haven't actually looked at it and sort of tried to understand it or tried to come to terms with it, which I guess, it could be considered a type of catharsis. It just feels like, that term catharsis, it's strange. And the Greeks used it originally, it was a daily practice, which I really like. Whereas today we use it more as an epiphany. As if like there's this one thing. Suddenly, if we look at like some moment from our past, it'll suddenly we'll understand and then be able to move on, and our lives will be changed. And the Greeks never
personally, no, it doesn't work that way. But yeah, you're right.
Yeah, the Greeks never. That's not how it was initially conceived. It was conceived as a daily practice. You'd wake up every day and you'd be who you were, and you'd have your same, the same situation around you. So
now, can you tell us a little more about your new collection of poetry, I Will Destroy You? What piqued my interest about it, of course, was the title. I thought, sounds foreboding. What does he mean by destroy? Who is being destroyed or is doing the destroying? I have not read it yet. It's fairly new, right? You just released it?
Yeah, it came out about a month ago, yeah.
I read one of the poems from it on VQR Online, The Ethics of Third Person, and I was stunned by, the stark honesty by it. And any straight woman who has ever loved a reckless man before knows how painful this scene is. I read that this collection stemmed from your conscious effort to not write, though obviously you wrote the book and you did eventually write. How long was this hiatus for you?
Well, what I meant by saying I wasn't writing is for, many years I've been, publishing books, writing books for quite a while now. I reached a point where it felt that maybe not the healthiest thing to be always in the midst of writing a book and sort of transforming any experience or any memory or any image into writing. So when I say not writing, it was almost maybe not like obsessively writing, and to sort of find some balance between like living and writing. So that a lot of writing occurred in that not writing time, but I wasn't always walking around with a book in my head or inside a book. I was sort of maybe waking up to just what it was to be alive without living in this abstraction of language constantly. So
at what point then did you say, okay, I got an idea for a book, or did you just look at your collection and say, okay, this is where I want to go with this theme, or how did you put that all together?
Well, usually I don't consciously think like I'm going to write a book about this thing. Like it's not like I have like I'm not a writer who comes up with a plan and then fills in could do an outline and then just fill in the outline. The poems find me more, and then later at some point I go back and try to find like how they fit together and whether they. So a lot of write a lot more than ends up in the book, and it's a matter of sort of distilling and refining. And there's a gathering period. I think with most art, there's a gathering period where you're gathering material or gathering just whatever energy around something, around a central concern. And then at a certain point, you go back and try to refine and distill that material. That's how the books come together for me. So
for this particular collection, you knew one. Was it surrounding things that were happening to you at the moment, or just overall?
It began more with like when my daughter turned 7. She began asking me about what it was like for me when I was 7, and I realized that I've written 3 memoirs, but I hadn't really got into that, like early childhood. If 7 is early childhood, I guess it is. It's still your childhood. I hadn't got into that, and I realized I had very few memories. I had very few. Like, it was really sort of very foggy. I think there are certain things around my family life that were wonderful and great, and there's certain things that are very hard and dark. I think the dark things sort of closed down a lot of like my sense of being alive. I was sort of amazed to be with my daughter, and so she's like she's going to remember these things. These things. Mm-hmm. She's like really like sort of alive to the world in a way that I feel like I wasn't. And so, but the memories I did have, I would tell her about those, and they led to. I think that's the beginning of the book.
So please, could you read a couple of poems from this collection for us?
There's this sort of great French term which is called a recit, R-E-C-I-T, and a recit is a French term for a type of writing, not the narration of an event, but that event itself. The approach to that event, the place where that event is made to happen.
I like that.
The writing isn't about anything. It's about the moment that you experience when you experience it. Mm-hmm. So I think that's like the bigger question would be to ask you afterwards, like, rather than for me to say what I expect you to experience. It's a very strange process. It's like saying, what's the painting about? Well, maybe there's a deer on the thing, but it's also more about the actual material of the paint and the moment of writing it and the memory around it. And there's many things around each thing. I'll read a couple poems from this book.
Okay.
I'll read the title poem first, and then I'll read another one. I will destroy you. Like laying a palm on the door of a furnace to test if it's still alive. I invite you up to my hotel room. Let's think of you as someone I'd meet in a dream, a representation of my own vast recklessness. Near the age my mother was when she set our house on fire. I'm asleep upstairs. I cannot call it accidental. This vast recklessness. My therapist points out that 15 minutes of movie violence releases as many opiates into the body as if being prepped for major surgery. For people like us, it is somehow calming. Tonight, it's Terminator 2 again. Let's go back to the scene where the liquid metal assassin assumes the form of a security guard, or in the mental hospital where mom is locked up. As the real guard gets a coffee from a vending machine, the liquid metal guy, disguised now as the linoleum floor, rises up behind him and slowly takes on his features, even the uniform. And when he turns and faces himself, he raises a finger to his own face, as if to point out that they are the same. But the finger turns into a blade, and he pushes it right into and through his own eye, and then he goes looking for mom.
Amazing.
So with these, I had the title, I Will Destroy You, before the book, the title of the book before I'd written that poem. And I wasn't really sure that the title had come to me. And I wasn't really sure, something about the dangers in the world and recklessness and self-destruction and who's destroying who is a question. And at a certain point, the poem, I went and saw, there was a re-release of Terminator 2, and I went and saw that. And I said, "Oh, this is what the books. This is what I mean by I Will Destroy You." So but
then it becomes a great introspection, like you said, who's the destroyer and who's being destroyed, and all about destruction and recklessness.
Yeah. I mean, it's clear it could be an ominous title. It's when I sent out an announcement for the book, the subject line was "I will destroy you." So I think a lot of people were sort of a little shocked by that, to get an email from me that in all caps it said "I will destroy you." So
you have another one?
Sure, I'll read this one. This is called "Poem to be Whispered by the Bedside of a Sleeping Child." Here's the deal: if you die, then I will be able to drink again, and no one alive will even blame me. This child is a dark wind inside, but not the darkest. Then I think, I'll have another child, a backup in another city with another woman, just in case. Then I think, I'll call this home to be whispered by the bedside of a sleeping child. So when you're older, you'll understand. Then I think, this isn't even a poem.
Wow. Yeah, I can relate to that. I've had my daughter at 36, and I always think about, if I didn't have her so late, what could I have accomplished,
Mm-hmm.
or what could I have done? And, and I think about, well, I think she kept me sane. I think I would have probably be self-destructive,
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, I like reading that poem because it's an uncomfortable poem, and then there'll be certain people in the audience that always sort of laugh sort of uncomfortably from it, and it's just, I understand they're having their own experience with it, which is the main thing I would want to have happen with anything I make or anything I go see, is to just not be passively told how to feel, but to have like maybe an uncomfortable, strange, mysterious feeling rise up in you that just opens you to a new possibility.
Well, thank you for sharing those. Before I ask you the next question, where can people order your book?
Oh, I usually don't send people to Amazon just because they seem like the devil to me. But so I on my website, I have a website, and the website nickflynn.org. All the books are on there, and then if you click on a book, there'll be a little link to IndieBound, which is a website that connects you to a local bookstore. It seems so. Local bookstores are so small independent bookstores.
That is awesome. That's so refreshing to know that it's not just Amazon all the time. And
I've never put Amazon or Barnes and Noble on my website just because they get enough. And that's the go-to for people, So I really love like small independent curated books that have the personality of the people that work there,
Well, I have a question from PK Harmon. He resides in Guam. So I've already interviewed quite a few people like from all over the world. And like I said, I posed the question to people if they had a question for you. He says he met you briefly once, and says, of course, you are a super nice dude, by the way. I had asked some folks if they had questions, things they'd like to know from this interview, and he asked, has the experience of being recognized and celebrated as a memoirist made you rethink the confessional impulses typical in contemporary poetry?
Yeah, I'm sorry to say I can't. I'd have to see a picture of CK. Is it?
PK.
PK. Yeah. Just because it's nice that what he said. That's a nice thing, and he's living in Guam, which is I've never been to. So the idea of like confessional is to me it's an interesting thing. So it's an uncomfortable stance, but to me it is sort of my primary mode. On one level, there's also I go in other modes too, and poems are very slippery in a way. The memoirs are by their nature more confessional, but poems can sort of drift in and out of sort of surrealism and the fantastic and sort of imagination, which I try to get that energy also in the memoirs also, but the confessional aspect of it, growing up, and especially with this new work that I'm doing now, it's becoming clearer to me that the new work is really going back into stuff from my childhood there was a lot of things in my childhood that were secret, that were not, seemed like they couldn't be talked about. My mother was suicidal, and there was this, her, setting a house on fire, and there were a lot of things that were wounding by those secrets. And so the confessional is this an attempt to sort of see what happens when those secrets are brought into the light. And the thing that I've noticed about it is that, we all carry secrets. There's secrets that happen all the time. There's lies and secrets that we all carry around. We try to all wrestle with, but, I think they can be some of the more, lead us to some of the more destructive impulses in our lives. And so it is an attempt to sort of, to go back and heal stuff that I went through, but ideally, like I say, with readers, they're sort of having their own experience with it, and they sort of can maybe look at their own secrets or lies, and just consider them. It's not a matter of, there's no right time to do it, but it just seemed like to consider what's on the other side of that is worth considering. So,
I know you've amassed a significant body of work by now. And now, of course, the release of your new book and naturally well received. What are your current projects? I know you're saying you're working on something, and how about any more movies?
The movies would take they take a lot of energy, and right now my energy is not really in that direction. But if I have a book coming out next year also, which is the sibling book. I often write poetry and memoir in tandem. Like they each take some 5 to 10 years to write. And so while I'm doing it, I'm writing in different genres. And so it just so happens that this I Will Destroy You has a sibling book that comes out, a brother. If the poetry is the sister, then the prose is the brother.
Oh, okay.
Or maybe it's the other way around, or if one is daytime and one is night. But, which I've done before with, some of my other memoirs and poetry books sort of go together. They sort of they're speaking to each other in some way. And so the one that's coming out next year from Norton is called This Is the Night Our House Will Catch Fire. And it's about this fire when I was 6 years old. That's a project that's coming out. Whether anything, I think since the first memoir, Another Bullshit Night in Suck City, was made into a movie, I think the things that I've written have been almost more and more difficult or impossible to make into films. I don't really, for whatever reason, and I'm not sure with this one, if this one is, and it's not really, that's like, it's just another thing. It's a whole nother track. I mean, I had fun making the film, but it's a whole nother life in some way.
Well, Nick, thank you so much for coming on the show. I'm so deeply moved and humbled by your willingness to grace us with your time, and I look forward to seeing more of your work.
Yeah, thanks, Christina. Thanks for the time. Thanks.
Well, everyone, that is it for now. Please tune in next week for my next featured guest. In the meantime, have a productive and creative week. Bye, Nick.
Bye, Christina.